Captain Sujin stood in the center of the massive circular chamber aboard the space station Harmony's edge. The walls stretched high above her head and curved away into shadows that seemed to go on forever. Around her sat the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Each one looked down at her from their elevated seats like judges ready to pass sentence on a criminal. The air felt thick and heavy. Sujin could smell the strange mix of different alien atmospheres that had been carefully balanced to keep everyone alive in this room. Some smells were sharp like metal. Others were sweet like flowers she had never seen. A few made her nose wrinkle, but she kept her face calm and steady. To her left sat Commander Jae-wook. His uniform was perfectly pressed and his hands rested calmly on his knees. He had been through many diplomatic meetings before, but never one this important. Next to him, Lieutenant Haiwan checked her datapad one more time. All three humans wore their best dress uniforms, with the Earth Defense Corps badges shining bright. On their chests, the Thalorian representative spoke first. Veltar was a being made of what looked like living crystal. Light passed through his body and created rainbow patterns on the walls behind him. When he moved, his arms made a sound like wind chimes. His voice came through a translator device that made everything he said sound cold and sharp. The species calling themselves humans request to join our military alliance, Veltar said. We have reviewed their application and their claimed abilities. We find them lacking in every meaningful way. A rumble of agreement came from the other alien delegates. Sujin felt her jaw tighten, but she did not let it show on her face. She had expected this reaction. Humans always got this reaction when they first met other species. The Corvani delegate stood up next. Krixaval was twice as tall as any human and covered in thick black armor that looked like the shell of a giant beetle. 4 arms ended in claws that could cut through steel. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked together, making a sound like someone breaking sticks. These soft creatures have no natural weapons, Krixaval said through his translator. No armor to protect them, no claws or fangs or poison. They cannot even survive in space without machines to keep them alive. What use could they possibly be in battle? More voices joined in from around the chamber. The Nexari delegate floated in a tank of glowing blue liquid. Her thoughts came directly into everyone's minds without words. The feeling was like ice water being poured over Sujin's brain. The Nexari said that humans had weak minds that could be crushed like paper by any species with proper mental abilities. Sujin looked up at each speaker in turn. She had studied all of these species for months before coming here. The Thalorians could channel energy through their crystal bodies and fire beams hot enough to melt steel. The Corvani were born warriors with natural weapons that had evolved over millions of years. The Nexari could move objects with their thoughts and read minds like humans read books. Every species in this chamber had something that made them dangerous, something that nature had given them to fight and kill and survive. The humans had nothing like that. Sujin knew this was true. Every alien in the room knew it was true. But they were all missing something important. A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. The Zenthi delegate had been quiet until now. The Zenthi looked like walking trees, with bark for skin and leaves that changed color when they talked. Their delegate was older than most of the others, and spoke slowly. Perhaps we are being too harsh, the Zenthi said. These humans may be weak in body, but they show intelligence. They have built ships that can travel between stars. They have weapons that use energy and metal projectiles. Surely this counts for something. Veltar made a sound like breaking glass that Sujin realized was laughter. Any species can point a machine and press a button, he said. Their weapons are crude copies of technology they learned from other species. Without their machines, they are helpless. Strip away their tools and they become prey animals waiting to be hunted. Sujin felt something hot rise up in her chest. She had heard these words before from other species humanity had encountered. Always the same dismissal, always the same assumption that tools and weapons were somehow cheating, as if using your brain to overcome your limits was wrong. Commander Jae-wook leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Stay calm. Let them finish." The demonstration period was supposed to be where each species showed off their combat abilities. Sujin had watched the others go first. The Thalorians had melted through 3 feet of solid metal with their energy beams. The Corvani had sliced through combat dummies like they were made of soft butter. The Nexari had crushed steel balls. into powder without touching them. Each display had been met with approving sounds from the other delegates. These were natural abilities that could not be taken away or broken or run out of power. These were what real warriors looked like according to the Galactic Council. Now it was humanity's turn. "What will your demonstration consist of?" asked the council chairman. He was a Vorthon who looked like a cross between a lizard and a bird. His scales shifted color when he spoke, and his eyes never blinked. Sujin stepped forward. "I request access to a basic metal fabrication unit and 30 minutes of preparation time." The chamber fell silent. Then the silence was broken by what could only be described as alien laughter. Different species made different sounds, but they all meant the same thing. The humans were about to embarrass themselves in front of the entire galactic community. "A fabrication unit," Veltar repeated. "You wish to make something rather than demonstrate an existing ability." "That is correct," Sujin said. Crixval clicked his mandibles together rapidly. "This proves our point exactly. They have no natural abilities to show. They must build something to pretend they are dangerous." "Very well," said the chairman. "You have your 30 minutes. The fabrication unit is being prepared now." Sujin walked across the chamber to where a machine was rising up from the floor. It looked like a metal box with screens and controls on the front. Inside, she could see robotic arms and cutting tools, and a small forge that could heat metal too, any temperature she needed. As she began to work, the aliens continued their discussion as if she was not there. They talked about whether humans should be classified as a protected species instead of potential allies. They wondered if humanity needed help advancing to a more civilized state. Some suggested that humans might make good servants or workers, but never warriors. Lieutenant Haiwan had to grip her hands together to keep from saying something that would end their diplomatic mission before it really started. Commander Jae-wook watched Sujin work and tried to look confident even though he was not sure what she was planning. Sujin ignored all the talking around her. Her hands moved steadily and surely as she programmed the fabrication unit. She had done this many times before, but never with so much riding on the outcome. The machine began to hum and glow as it started to work. "What is she making?" one of the aliens asked. "Some kind of primitive tool, probably," another answered. "Perhaps a club or a spear. Very basic weapons for a very basic species." Sujin smiled to herself as she worked. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they understood what humans were capable of. They thought they knew what made a species dangerous. In 30 minutes, they were going to learn something new about the galaxy and about the species they had just dismissed as weak and helpless. The fabrication unit continued to work as the aliens continued to talk and laugh and make bets about how quickly the human demonstration would be over. The fabrication unit worked with quiet efficiency as Sujin programmed each piece carefully. Her fingers moved across the control interface like she had done this 1,000 times before. The machine began to shape and form metal according to her exact specifications. What emerged was not what any of the aliens expected to see. The first piece that came out was small and seemed almost delicate. It was a knife with a curved blade about as long as Sujin's hand. The metal gleamed under. The chamber lights and the edge looked sharp enough to cut through paper without making a sound. But this was just the beginning. Sujin continued to work as more pieces took shape inside the machine. Each one was different, but they all shared the same basic concept. They were blades, simple pieces of shaped metal with edges designed for cutting. The aliens watched with growing confusion as piece after piece emerged from the fabrication unit. Lieutenant Haiwan moved closer to Sujin and spoke quietly so the aliens could not hear. "Are you sure about this, Captain? They expect something impressive, something that will make them respect our military capabilities." Sujin did not look up from her work. "They think we are weak because we have no natural weapons," she said. "They assume that because we were not born with claws or fangs or energy projection that we cannot be dangerous. They are about to learn how wrong they are." The next piece that emerged was longer than the first. It was a straight blade with a simple handle wrapped in cord for a better grip. Sujin picked it up and tested the balance. She made a small adjustment to the weight distribution and put it back in the machine for final modifications. Commander Jae-wook had begun setting up targets and obstacles in the demonstration area. He moved quickly and efficiently, placing combat dummies made from materials that simulated different alien physiologies. Some were hard like crystal to represent the Thalorians, others had thick shells like the Corvani. A few were designed to test how well weapons worked against psychic barriers. Meanwhile, the alien delegates continued their discussion about humanity. Most of them had stopped paying attention to what Sujin was doing. They were too busy arguing about whether humans deserved any consideration at all from the galactic community. "Their ships are slow and poorly designed," said a delegate from the Keth Empire. The Keth looked like giant spiders with too many eyes and spoke through vibrations that the translators turned into words. "Their weapons are copies of our technology from 50 years ago. They have contributed nothing new to galactic civilization." Veltar agreed with a sound like crystal bells ringing. "They are a young species that has barely learned to leave their home planet. Perhaps in a few thousand years they might develop something useful. For now, they are simply taking up space and resources that could be better used by established civilizations." Krixivol clicked his mandibles in approval. "The Corvani have conquered hundreds of worlds using nothing but our natural abilities. We need no tools or machines to prove our worth. A true warrior species fights with what nature has given them." Sujin heard every word, but her expression never changed. She continued working with the same calm focus she had shown since the beginning. The fabrication unit produced piece after piece under her guidance. Some were small throwing knives with perfect balance. Others were longer blades designed for close combat. Each one was crafted with precision that would have impressed any weaponsmith on Earth. The largest piece took shape slowly as Sujin programmed the most complex design. It was a sword in the traditional Korean style called a geom. The blade was straight and double-edged with a gentle curve that made it perfect for both cutting and thrusting attacks. The handle was long enough for one or two hands depending on the fighting situation. As she worked, Sujin thought about the history behind each design. The throwing knives were based on techniques that Korean warriors had perfected centuries ago. The combat knife drew from military training that had been refined through countless battles. The sword represented thousands of years of metallurgy and martial arts combined into one perfect weapon. "What exactly do you think those primitive tools will accomplish?" asked a new voice. The speaker was a Ralith delegate who had been quiet until now. The Ralith were tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that changed color to match their emotions. Right now, the delegate's skin was a dismissive shade of blue-gray. "Metal shaped into points and edges," the Ralith continued. "Any child could make such things. How do simple blades compare to energy weapons or psychic abilities or natural armor that has evolved over millions of years?" Sujin finally looked up from her work. The fabrication unit was nearly finished with the last piece. Around her, the chamber was filled with aliens who seemed certain that they had already seen everything humans had to offer. They had judged humanity based on their own understanding of what made a species dangerous and found them lacking. "You assume that natural weapons are superior to artificial ones," Sujin said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You believe that because something evolved naturally, it must be better than something created through intelligence and planning." The chamber grew quieter as aliens realized the human was finally speaking directly to them instead of just working quietly at her machine. "You look at humans and see a species with no claws," Sujin continued. "No natural armor, no energy projection abilities, no psychic powers. You see weakness where you should see potential." Veltar made his glass-breaking laugh sound again. "Potential for what? You are soft creatures who die easily and have no natural means of defending yourselves. What could you possibly teach us about warfare?" Sujin smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. "You are about to find out," she said. The fabrication unit finished its work with a soft chime. Sujin opened the machine and began removing her completed weapons. Each blade caught the light and reflected it back like captured starfire. She arranged them carefully on a piece of soft leather that would serve as a carrying case. The aliens watched with growing unease as Sujin selected the first knife and tested its edge against a piece of scrap metal. The blade cut through the metal like it was warm cheese. The sound it made was barely a whisper, but everyone in the chamber heard it clearly. "Impressive craftsmanship," admitted the Zenthi delegate. but we fail to see how shaped metal can compete with natural abilities that have been perfected through evolution. Sujin rolled up the leather case containing her weapons and secured it with ties. Evolution gives you what you need to survive in one environment, she said. Intelligence gives you what you need to survive in any environment. She walked toward the demonstration area where Commander Jaewook had finished setting up the targets. Lieutenant Haiwan followed at a respectful distance, carrying recording equipment that would document whatever was about to happen. Your 30 minutes are up, announced the chairman. Please begin your demonstration. Sujin unrolled her weapon case and selected a simple combat knife. The blade was about 6 inches long with a black handle that fit perfectly in her grip. To the aliens, it looked like nothing more than a shaped piece of metal. They had no way of knowing that they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be human. The chamber fell completely silent as Sujin stepped into the demonstration area and faced the first target. Sujin began to move and the chamber fell silent in a way that seemed to swallow all sound. What the aliens saw was not what they expected from a demonstration of military capability. There were no loud explosions or bright flashes of energy. No dramatic poses or shouted battle cries. Instead, they watched something that looked almost like a dance. Sujin moved with fluid grace as she stepped forward with the combat knife in her hand. Every movement seemed to flow into the next like water running downhill. But there was nothing soft or gentle about what she was doing. Each step placed her in the perfect position for attack or defense. Each turn of her body created momentum that could drive a blade through armor or bone. The first target was a combat dummy designed to simulate Thalorian physiology. The crystalline structure was hard enough to stop most conventional weapons, but Sujin had studied the weaknesses that every species carried. She moved around the dummy in a spiral pattern that confused the watching aliens until they realized what she was doing. The knife struck 3 times so quickly that the movements blurred together. Each strike hit a different stress point in the crystal structure. The dummy did not break immediately, but small cracks appeared where the blade had touched it. Sujin stepped back and waited. 5 seconds later, the entire dummy shattered into pieces that scattered across the floor. The aliens stared in shock at what had just happened. The Thalorian delegate, Veltar, made a sound like wind blowing through. Broken glass. Impossible, Veltar said. Our crystal structure is harder than your primitive metals. Your blade should have broken against our natural armor. Sujin moved to the second target without answering. This dummy was built to simulate Corvani physiology with thick chitinous plates covering vital areas. The armor looked impenetrable and had been designed to stop energy weapons and projectile attacks, but Sujin did not try to break through the armor. Instead, she began what looked like a complex fighting form that combined traditional Korean martial arts with modern military knife combat techniques. The blade moved in patterns that seemed random until the aliens realized she was demonstrating dozens of different ways to attack the same target. The knife slipped between armor plates at joints and connection points. It found gaps that were too small to see but large enough for a precisely angled blade to penetrate. Sujin showed how the same weapon could be used to cut, thrust, slice, or leverage depending on the situation and the opponent. Krixavol clicked his mandibles together in what might have been nervousness. Those are weak points that only exist in training dummies, he said. In real combat, a Corvani warrior would not stand still and allow such precise attacks. Sujin finally spoke without stopping her demonstration. You assume your natural armor makes you invulnerable, she said as the knife found another gap between plates. But every defense has weaknesses. Every strength becomes a limitation when you depend on it too much. She moved to the third target, which was designed to test attacks against psychic barriers. The Nexari delegate had been floating silently in her tank, but now her thoughts pressed against everyone's minds with cold amusement. Your metal blade cannot cut thoughts, the Nexari said without words. Psychic barriers are not physical things that can be broken by crude weapons. Sujin smiled and drew one of her throwing knives. You are right, she said, but psychic abilities require concentration and focus. What happens when that focus is broken? The knife left her hand faster than most of the aliens could follow. It struck the psychic barrier dummy and bounced off without doing any damage. But Sujin had already thrown a second knife, and then a third. Each blade struck a different point on the barrier at precisely timed intervals. The barrier held against the first impact and the second. But the third knife arrived just as the dummies' simulated psychic defenses were recovering from the previous attacks. The blade slipped through the weakened barrier and struck the target directly. "Psychic abilities are powerful," Sujin said as she collected her throwing knives. "But they have limitations like any other weapon. They require mental energy. They can be disrupted by unexpected attacks. They work best when the user is calm and focused." She demonstrated this point by throwing all three knives at once from different angles. The barrier dummy tried to track multiple incoming threats, but could not maintain full protection against all of them. Two knives bounced off, but the third found its mark. The aliens began to realize that they were not watching a simple weapons demonstration. Sujin was teaching them about the fundamental differences between natural abilities and human adaptability. Every species in the chamber was built around their primary strength, but humans had learned to identify and exploit the weaknesses that came with every strength. Sujin drew the Korean sword and began a demonstration that combined centuries of martial arts tradition with modern military training. The blade moved through forms that had been perfected by countless generations of warriors. Each movement served multiple purposes and could be adapted for different situations. The sword work was beautiful to watch, but there was nothing decorative about it. Every cut would be lethal. Every thrust would find vital organs. Every defensive movement created opportunities for counterattack. Sujin flowed from one form to another, showing how the same weapon could be used in dozens of different ways. "Your natural weapons are part of your body," Sujin said as the sword traced patterns in the air. "They cannot be modified or improved. They work the same way in every situation. But a blade is a tool that becomes whatever the wielder needs it to be." She demonstrated by using the sword as a lever to break through a barrier, then as a cutting tool to slice through tough materials, then as a thrusting weapon to pierce armor. The same piece of metal served every function depending on how it was used. Lieutenant Hai Wan had been recording everything, but now she stepped forward to add her own commentary. "Every human child learns about weapons and warfare," she said. "Not because we are violent by nature, but because we had to be better than every predator on our world to survive." Commander Jae-wook nodded in agreement. "Other species evolved natural weapons to deal with specific threats," he said. "Humans evolved intelligence to create whatever weapons were needed for any situation." Sujin moved through a final sequence that combined all the weapons she had created. Throwing knives struck distant targets, while she fought imaginary opponents with the combat knife. The sword swept in wide arcs that would clear multiple enemies before switching to precise thrusts for single targets. The demonstration was reaching its climax, but the aliens were beginning to understand that what they had taken for weakness was actually something far more dangerous. Humans had not evolved natural weapons because they had evolved something better. They had evolved the ability to imagine and create any weapon they needed. Dr. Min Ho stepped forward from where he had been quietly observing. He was a xenobiologist who had spent years studying alien physiology and psychology. "Every species we have encountered depends on their primary evolutionary advantage," he said. "But what happens when you face an opponent who has studied your advantages and learned how to counter them?" Sujin came to rest in the center of the demonstration area. She had barely worked up a sweat despite moving constantly for the past 20 minutes. The weapons in her hands looked as sharp and deadly as when she had first drawn them. "You judge species based on what nature gave them," she said to the assembled aliens. "But humans learned long ago that nature is just a starting point. We are not limited by what we were born with. We become what we choose to become." The chamber was completely silent as the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. Sujin stood in the center of the demonstration area with her blades still in hand. The silence that filled the chamber was different now. It was not the dismissive quiet of beings who thought they were watching something beneath their notice. It was the heavy silence of creatures who had just realized they might have made a serious mistake. She began to speak while cleaning the blades with slow, careful movements. Each weapon received the same attention and care that she had put into creating them. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous," she said. "It is not these knives. It is not any weapon we can build or forge or design." The aliens leaned forward in their seats. Even Veltar had stopped making his dismissive glass-breaking sounds. Krixvol's mandibles were completely still. The Nexari delegates' psychic presence felt focused and intense instead of coldly amused. What makes us dangerous is that we refuse to accept limitations, Sujin continued. Every species in this chamber was given gifts by evolution. Natural weapons, natural armor, natural abilities that make you superior in specific situations, but you have also been given limitations that you cannot overcome. She held up the combat knife and let the light reflect off its edge. A Thalorian can project energy beams that melt steel, but those beams require internal energy that can be exhausted. They work best at range and become less effective in close combat. Your crystal structure is strong, but it has stress points that can be exploited if someone knows where to look. Veltar's body flickered with angry colors. Those are theoretical weaknesses, he said. No species has ever successfully exploited them in actual combat. No species has ever studied you the way humans study everything, Sujin replied. We have spent months learning about every species in this council. We know your strengths and we know your weaknesses. We know them because we had to know them to survive. She moved to stand near the shattered Thalorian dummy. On Earth, humans were not the strongest predators. We were not the fastest or the most dangerous. We survived because we learned to understand everything around us. We studied every threat until we knew how to defeat it. Commander Inwu stepped forward from where he had been standing with the other human delegates. He was older than the others, with gray hair and scars on his hands that spoke of long experience. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen real combat. Every human child learns military history, Inwu said. We study every war our species has fought, every weapon we have created, every tactic we have developed. Not because we love violence, but because violence has shaped us into what we are today. He gestured toward Sujin, who was now cleaning the throwing knives. Captain Sujin is not even a dedicated combat specialist. She is a ship commander whose primary job is navigation and crew management. But every human in the military learns blade work. Every human learns hand-to-hand combat. Every human learns how to kill with improvised weapons, because we never know when our technology might fail us. The aliens began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The implications of what they were hearing went far beyond simple weapons. Training. They were learning about a species that had turned adaptability into an art form. Sujin spoke again while working on the Korean sword. Your natural abilities are impressive, she said. But they are also predictable. A Korvani always attacks with blade arms. A Thalorian always uses energy projection. A Nexari always relies on psychic powers. You fight the same way every time because you have no choice. She demonstrated by moving through several different fighting stances with the sword. A human with a blade can fight like a Korvani with slashing attacks, or like a Thalorian with precise striking, or like a Nexari by using psychological warfare and misdirection. The same weapon becomes whatever we need it to be. Krixavol finally spoke, but his voice lacked the confident dismissal it had carried before. You speak of adaptability as if it is superior to evolutionary perfection. Our natural weapons have been refined over millions of years. How can crude metal compare to that? Sujin smiled, and the expression was not entirely pleasant. Your natural weapons took millions of years to develop, she said. These blades took me 30 minutes to create. Which approach allows for faster improvement and innovation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The aliens began to realize that they were not just dealing with a species that used tools, they were dealing with a species that could rapidly create new tools for any situation they encountered. Lieutenant Taehyun had been quiet throughout the demonstration, but now he stepped forward with a datapad in his hands. He was young for a military officer, but his eyes held the same intensity that marked all the human delegates. We have been monitoring galactic conflicts for the past year, Taehyun said. Every military engagement follows predictable patterns, because each species fights according to their natural abilities. Thalorians use energy bombardment from long range, Korvani close to melee distance. Nexari attempt psychic domination. The tactics never change because the capabilities never change. He activated his datapad, and holographic displays appeared showing recent battle footage. But what happens when an opponent refuses to fight according to the expected patterns? What happens when every engagement becomes unpredictable because the enemy adapts their tactics to counter your natural advantages? The battle footage showed human ships using unconventional maneuvers and weapon combinations that confused their opponents. Instead of relying on a single approach, humans constantly shifted tactics to exploit whatever weaknesses they could find. Su-Jin finished cleaning her weapons and began to arrange them back in their leather case. "You asked what these primitive tools could accomplish," she said. "The answer is anything we need them to accomplish, because we are not limited by what they can do. We are only limited by our imagination and our willingness to learn." She rolled up the weapon case and secured it with practiced movements. "Every species we have encountered thinks their natural gifts make them superior. But natural gifts come with natural limitations. Humans chose a different path. We chose to become whatever we needed to become." Dr. Minho stepped forward again, with his own datapad activated. "We have identified critical weaknesses in every species represented in this council," he said calmly. "Not theoretical weaknesses, practical vulnerabilities that could be exploited in actual combat situations." The chamber erupted in angry voices as aliens protested this claim. But Minho continued speaking in the same calm tone. "Thalorian energy projection requires line of sight and becomes less accurate at close range. Corvani natural armor has weak points at joint connections. Nexari psychic abilities are disrupted by electromagnetic interference. Should I continue?" The protests grew louder, but Su-Jin raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice cut through the noise like one of her blades. "We are not threatening you," she said. "We are trying to make you understand what you are dismissing. You think humans are weak because we have no natural weapons. But we are dangerous precisely because we have no natural limitations." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors of each delegate in turn. "You evolved to be perfect at one thing. We evolved to be adequate at everything. And adequate can become exceptional if you are willing to work hard enough and learn fast enough." The silence that followed was complete and heavy with implications that none of the aliens wanted to fully consider. The silence stretched on until Admiral Sora stood up from where she had been observing the entire demonstration. She was the highest-ranking human present and had remained quiet while her subordinates made their case. Now, her presence filled the chamber with quiet authority that made even the largest aliens pay attention. "I can see that our demonstration has raised questions," Sora said. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of someone who had commanded fleets in actual combat. "Let me address the concerns I can feel building in this room." She walked slowly around the chamber as she spoke. Her uniform was simple compared to the elaborate decorations that many alien species favored, but there was something about her bearing that commanded respect. "You are wondering if this display was a threat. You are asking yourselves whether humans might be more dangerous than you initially calculated. Some of you are probably considering whether it would be safer to deny our application and keep us isolated." Veltar made a sound like crystal chimes in the wind. "The thought had occurred to us," he admitted. "If humans can identify and exploit weaknesses in our natural defenses, then perhaps they pose a risk to galactic stability." Sora stopped, walking and faced the Thalorian delegate directly. "Every species in this chamber has the ability to destroy human colonies," she said. "Your energy projection could glass our cities. Corvani warriors could overrun our defenses. Nexari's psychic abilities could drive our populations insane. We know this. We have always known this." She gestured towards Su-Jin, who was still standing, quietly with her weapon case. "We demonstrated our capabilities not to threaten you, but to earn your respect. Humans prefer to make allies rather than enemies, but we refuse to be dismissed as irrelevant or weak." The Corvani delegate Krixvol shifted in his seat. His massive form made sounds like grinding stone when he moved. "You speak of preferring allies, but you have just shown us how easily you could kill any of us. How do we know your peaceful intentions are genuine?" Commander In-Woo stepped forward to answer. "Because we could have demonstrated our military capabilities in other ways," he said. "We could have brought recordings of human weapons destroying targets. We could have shown you our fleet compositions or our strategic doctrines. Instead, we chose to show you blade work." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate. "Blade fighting requires getting close to your opponent. It requires skill and training and personal risk. Anyone can fire a weapon from a safe distance. Only someone who truly understands combat chooses to fight with blades. Dr. Min-ho activated his datapad again and new holographic displays appeared. We study other species not to find ways to destroy them, but to find ways to work with them, he said. Understanding your strengths and weaknesses helps us design tactics that complement your abilities rather than compete with them. The displays showed theoretical battle formations where human forces worked alongside alien units. Human adaptability filling gaps in alien capabilities, while alien natural abilities provided overwhelming force in their areas of expertise. Cooperation multiplies effectiveness, Min-ho continued. Competition wastes resources that could be better used against common threats. Lieutenant Tae-hyun moved to join the other humans. Our weapons training includes blade work, because technology can fail, he said. Power sources run out, equipment breaks down, communications get disrupted. When that happens, we want our people to still be dangerous. He drew a simple knife from his belt and held it up for the aliens to see. This blade will work in any environment. It requires no power source. It has no complex parts that can break. It will cut just as well in vacuum as it does in atmosphere. That reliability is why humans still train with primitive weapons even though we have access to advanced technology. The Zenthi delegate who had spoken earlier shifted slightly. The movement made their bark-like skin creak and rustle. You are saying that humans train for the worst possible scenarios, they said. That your military doctrine assumes everything will go wrong. Exactly, said Sujin. We plan for equipment failure. We plan for communication breakdown. We plan for supply line disruption. We train our people to be effective even when everything goes wrong, because in real combat everything usually does go wrong. The Nexari delegate's psychic presence touched everyone's mind with a feeling of curious consideration. This explains the effectiveness we observed in your battle recordings, she said without words. Human forces continued to function even when their technology was compromised. We assumed this was due to superior equipment redundancy. It was due to superior training redundancy, Admiral Sora said. Every human soldier can fight effectively with advanced weapons, or with primitive weapons, or with improvised weapons, or with no weapons at all. We do not depend on any single capability because dependence creates vulnerability. She walked back to the center of the chamber, where Sujin was waiting. The blade demonstration was chosen specifically because it represents human military philosophy. We do not rely on natural gifts because we have none. We do not depend on superior technology because technology can be countered. We depend on adaptability and the willingness to become whatever the situation requires. The chairman had been silent throughout the discussion, but now he spoke up. What are you asking from this council? He said. What role do humans expect to play in galactic military affairs? Admiral Sora smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. We are asking to be treated as equals, she said. We offer our services as military advisors and strategic consultants. We offer to train your forces in unconventional tactics and adaptive warfare. We offer to serve as allies who can complement your natural abilities with our artificial ones. She gestured toward the other human delegates. Captain Sujin could teach your warriors how to identify and exploit weaknesses in any opponent. Commander In-woo could show your strategic planners how to adapt their tactics to unexpected situations. Dr. Min-ho could help your scientists understand the psychology and physiology of any species you encounter. Lieutenant Hai-wan stepped forward with her recording equipment. We have documented everything that happened here today, she said. The footage shows exactly what human military training can accomplish with basic equipment and 30 minutes of preparation time. Imagine what we could accomplish with proper resources and time to plan. The aliens began to murmur among themselves in their various languages. The sounds filled the chamber with a complex mix of clicks and chimes and mental whispers. Sujin could sense that the mood had shifted from dismissive amusement to serious consideration. Veltar spoke first. The Thalorian Confederation would be interested in learning more about human tactical analysis, he said. Perhaps we have been too dependent on our energy projection capabilities. Krixval clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Corvani have always believed that natural weapons were superior to artificial ones, but your demonstration suggests that adaptability might be more valuable than we realized. More voices joined in as species that had never faced a real challenge began to see humans as the catalyst for growth they had not known they needed. Instead of fearing human capabilities, they began to see opportunities for improvement in their own forces. Admiral Sora nodded as she listened to each response. "The galaxy is a dangerous place," she said. "There are threats out there that none of us have encountered yet. When those threats appear, we will need every advantage we can get. Natural abilities, advanced technology, and the kind of adaptability that only comes from refusing to accept limitations." She looked around the chamber one final time. "Humans do not claim to be the strongest species or the most advanced. We claim to be the most stubborn. We refuse to give up. We refuse to accept defeat. And we refuse to stop learning and growing and becoming better than we were." The vote was unanimous. Humanity was granted full military alliance status and immediate access to galactic defense planning committees. But more than that, they had earned something they had wanted from the beginning. They had earned respect as equals in a galaxy that had initially seen them as nothing more than primitive weaklings with delusions of grandeur. Sujin carefully packed away her blades as aliens approached to discuss joint training exercises and cultural exchanges. The weapons that had seemed so simple and primitive an hour ago were now viewed as symbols of a military philosophy that could revolutionize galactic warfare. The humans had introduced the galaxy to a concept that would change everything. The idea that evolution was not destiny, but merely a starting point. The understanding that any limitation could be overcome with enough intelligence and determination and willingness to adapt. And most importantly, the recognition that the greatest strength was not what nature gave you, but what you chose to become.